Start recording. Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Strobeck. Along with me today is Tianlong Zhao and Robert Munson. We're going to be discussing today the NFL and the national anthem. Pretty much discussing the NFL's new policy directed at the players regarding their standing or their activities done during the national anthem. So to give you guys a little bit of background on this, starting back in 1945, it was determined that the national anthem would be played part of every game. And this has kind of become standard in the entire sports world, that the anthem is played before pretty much every major sporting event: baseball, basketball, soccer. In situations where we're playing international teams, they generally will also play the national anthem of the respective countries that are attending the event. So this occurs during the World Cup, as well as most any other national sporting events. So starting in 2009, players were brought onto the field at before every game. So the players previous to that remained in the locker room doing their pregame preparation. The national anthem was played as part of the pregame preparation, and the players came onto the field and games began. There were exceptions that during the Super Bowl and then after 9/11 that it was changed that the players would actually be on the field during these events. In 2016, the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, Colin Kaepernick, began sitting for the national anthem. He was literally sitting on the bench while the other players were standing during the playing of the national anthem. So he was sitting pretty much by himself with his arms spread out, looking relaxed and as if he didn't really care anything about the national anthem. This is kind of the opinion that was given off to most people. So this kind of started attaining a little bit of attention from the media, who began focusing on this. And after 3 games of doing that, he started kneeling before the games and doing so in the form of it tended to look like he's taking some sort of protest. Before this occurrence, there were no real specific rules in the rule book as to how the players were supposed to conduct themselves during the national anthem. Obviously, the rule book contains a lot of rules and regulations on what and how players can and what they do during the game. So this was something that wasn't necessarily addressed or specified. It was something that was just kind of assumed that players who were taught this activity from the beginnings of school, that you stand for the national anthem and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, that it's kind of sense of patriotic American pride, that's standard in what people should do. So the manual didn't specify that they should say that, so it was changed to say that they should stand for it, but there was no specifics on discipline or any actions that could be taken for players that did not. So the rules said that they may be fined, but didn't say that they necessarily would be fined or that there would be any type of discipline associated with that. So now I'm going to take the opportunity to turn this over to Mr. Munson, who will give us a little bit more detail on this occurrence of these events.
Thanks, Robert. So this Kaepernick's kneeling was, of course, not the first political statement made in sports, just maybe the latest. Some of the examples that we were looking at were certainly obviously Muhammad Ali, who refused to be inducted into the Army as a conscientious objector. One of the most famous, Tommy Smith and John Carlos in the Olympics. And then I added Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, a former LSU great, go Tigers, who also made his own protests during prayers at NBA games. So this was not the first time this had happened, but certainly one of the latest and most high profile. And I think one of the reasons for that was because of the politics involved. Particularly lately, our president, Donald Trump, has taken a very vocal stand against players kneeling or sitting during the anthem, which has placed a lot of pressure, I think, on the league and its players to make a decision on how they want to deal with this. Of course, the government's relationship with the NFL has gone on for some time, almost 10 years now, where the Department of Defense has been a longtime sponsor of the league, really spending millions upon millions of dollars promoting patriotism through various displays at before and during and after games. And this has called into some question some of the motivations of the NFL. That's a huge ethical question. In fact, Robert Tian-Long and I discussed whether or not we were going to include this in this paper, and kind of figured, honestly, it would be its own paper, if not a few books on its own. So we touched on it a bit, but the main thing we wanted to focus on was the new policy, which was just recently announced in 2018. And essentially the players now, if they are on the field, are required to stand and show respect. They do, however, have the option to stay in the locker room if they so choose. This appears to be some kind of, by Goodell, some kind of offering, if you will, to the players so that they would have some kind of choice in the matter. In the end, however, failure to stand during the anthem for players who are out there shall result in discipline from the league, which is the biggest difference between the previous rule and this new policy. So I'm going to turn it over, I think, now to Tian-Long.
Hey, Barbara, let me ask you a question real quick on this,
Yeah.
Something that may be of interest or something that others may have. So with this new policy, was this policy designed by the league, or was this designed by the owners? How does that?
I think that's one of the big questions we were looking into, because it from what I can tell, it's not clear who necessarily developed or designed it. A lot of this seemed to have been done sort of quietly and a little bit behind the scenes, and then announced one day out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere anyway. Clearly the league and its owners were aware of the policy and its development, but it doesn't appear anyone else was, and that's one of the problems, I think.
That's great. So let's turn it over to Tian-Long.
Thank you, Robert. All right. The new, this is where I started. The new policy. Okay. Okay. The new policy actually says originally the policy was set to be voted on approved and unanimous by the owners, and it was an official voting process for all the stakeholders. And as the NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell says, we want people to be respectful of the national anthem. We want people to stand, that's all, personnel, and make sure they treat this moment in a respectful fashion. And that's something we think we owe to, actually, we want to mention too, we owe to the fans, to the public. And we were also very sensitive to give players choices. Actually, he has a very open attitude towards this case, and but we still think a formal vote should be included in this case. And the new policy also mentions that from the league spokesman Brian McCarthy, he confirmed that the owners didn't hold an official vote before passing their new national anthem policy. That sorry, pause over here. Okay, about this new policy, Robert Munson, do you mind give me more about the details of the new policy?
Yeah, I think in terms of how the policy was adopted is apparently kind of atypical from various media reports that we all looked at. A number of owners and other league officials essentially confirmed that this type of broad-reaching policy would usually have to be put to a vote of the owners and a formal vote, so that there would be a count. And for whatever reason, and there are definitely different discussions on why that might be, it doesn't appear that happened. It appears that an informal poll was taken. Many of the owners abstained from that poll. And whether the lack of a vote was a specific request by the owners themselves, we simply don't know. We just know that it was adopted without that vote, which is odd.
Yeah, you know, it seems entirely possible that the owners could be taking that approach because they don't want to be seen as being directly involved. I mean, it does seem kind of strange that a commissioner of the league would be able to make a decision like that without having to get buy-in from the owners. I mean, the way the NFL is structured is that the teams, the league belongs to the team. So they have, without the league or without the teams, the league wouldn't exist, I think is the way that it's structured, as opposed to like Major League Soccer where the league controls the teams, and it's a different arrangement. But in the NFL, the owners are the ones that decide on all the rule changes and have votes like that. So yeah, it does seem kind of strange that the policy comes from Goodell as not opposed to the actual teams themselves. So all right, move on to the next slide. So Tianlong, you want to talk to us about the players side of this?
All right. For the NFL Player Association, their reaction is actually some players they mentioned that the NFL really should not consult the union in the development of this new policy. And also somebody else says the vote by NFL club CEOs today contradicts the statements mentioned by players leadership by Commissioner Robert Goodell and the chairman of the NFL's Management Council, John Mara, about the principles, values, and the patriotism of our league. And I think the reaction here for players is they kind of unpleased by the rules here. So what do you guys think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the NFLPA was furious and sort of made sure that the league knew that they were going to look into the CBA agreement, and anything that conflicted with that agreement, they were going to go after. Mm-hmm. There are a number of players who came out publicly and essentially said it's outrageous that they were not informed about this or brought into that discussion, at least.
You know, something I think might be interesting too, Tianlong, how would in your country, how would a situation like this have been handled? Would it have had attention similar to this, or would it have been, you know, I'm just kind of curious how, you know, your different view, how that would look.
You mean for this situation right here?
Right.
Actually, I feel like the Players Association has their reason to be upset about it, because I think the league, they didn't respect for their opinions about these new rules, right? And I think they really need to put up like a formal vote from both owners and maybe for the players too.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, definitely is a bringing in a different perspective for sure.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about the, we actually probably already starting into that, but we kind of parlayed this into the potential ethical dilemmas of this.
Yeah. The ethical dilemma here is very apparent, that the policy was adopted unilaterally and actually without the owners' formal votes, and there's no accountability from the official side. And also the policy was adopted without the involvement of players, and the league likely has an ethical obligation to involve all the stakeholders from our perspective.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting relationship between an ethical decision and accountability. They seem to go together a lot, and with this, they don't. And I think that calls into question some of the ethics involved behind this a little bit. It's a difficult relationship to define all the time, but it seems like the two go together more often than not.
Yeah, right. I mean, players' unions are typically, or any union is typically pretty strong, and the NFL players' union is they definitely have a voice in terms of how things are done in the NFL. I mean, we remember years ago they had a strike, and it was owners versus players, and this really doesn't seem like it would be a whole lot different, except in this case it's the league, and the owners are kind of standing back and saying, we didn't know about it.
Yeah, on the flip side of that too, it's like if the league gets all of the players involved at every step and gets the owners involved at every step. They probably never come to a decision at all.
Right.
And there was a lot of public pressure and a lot of dwindling viewers of the league, and they had some tough decisions to make, and it seems like they made one.
Yeah, exactly. So Tianlong, so what do you think about the NFL? What choices do you think they could have had with regards to including the players?
I think they you mean the that actually can we pause over here? That really leads to our conclusion.
All right, so Tianlong, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this ethical dilemma.
All right, the NFL actually had the choice regarding including players. They can include on some level, even just informing that would represent a balanced approach to developing a policy that impacts players' perceived or legal rights to expression. I think they have the rights to know the policy in advance, and also they have the right to vote in this process too. And also, this exclusion would simply make the process easier for league management to formulate a policy and adopt the policy, presumably stamping down the political and cultural pressures that some believe had led to the dwindling popularity of the game. So it will make, I think, it will make the management and the league officials to make their life easier if they just put on a formal vote to get the players involved.
So yeah, they definitely don't like that dwindling popularity of the game because that affects revenue.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the conclusion.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk. I think for our conclusion part, we'll say players are supposed to have an input on such a strong decision of this new policy. And to be fair, it's hard to envision that the NFL crafting a policy that satisfies satisfy only the 32 owners. That doesn't seem to be an enlightened solution. A better solution can be that the NFL should have required a formal vote of the owners and alerted the NFL Player Association on their proposed new rule to get some feedback. And the voting process should be just and fair. Also, it should be open to the public. It may not be necessary for all the players to have a formal vote, since the majority of players still choose to stand on the field and they have the liberty to stay in the locker room too. And as the new policy is a significant change in the terms and conditions of the employment, formal collective bargains policy could be more convincing to both players and the public too. It's quite possible that the feedback and engagement of NFL Player Association wouldn't make a big difference of the decision outcome, but we think it's honorable and ethical to ensure that all the stakeholders of the NFL to get involved.
Yeah, it feels like, Tianlong, without getting the players involved, that it kind of violates the spirit of that relationship. They may have had a very specific or legal or literal right to do it, but it definitely feels like it violates that. And I'm curious, this just happened. We haven't had a game yet, so I'm really curious if this works and the public pressure kind of subsides, or if it actually comes back and haunts them a little bit, and I guess only time will tell.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things that when you look at how this was put together, and clearly there's going to be sides that are going to be opposed to this. I mean, even if they had tried to include the owners in a particular vote, or if they had brought the players union in, they probably still wouldn't have been able to achieve any kind of result that would have been agreed to by everyone. I mean, there's going to be parts of it that are not going to be agreed, and it's a question of who really has the overall authority to dictate morality. So, I think that that we're obviously going to see, because it's the season is upon us, and there's been a lot of reports of players that aren't happy with this. And the fact that the owners kind of taking it wasn't me kind of attitude, I don't think we've seen the solution to this. And I think there's going to have to be some more discussion before there's ever something that would kind of appease most people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like this is going to end very well here, but I guess
Yeah.
we'll see.
All right, so we'll wrap this up. I'd like to thank everyone who's taking the time to watch this and sat through this. And if you guys have any more detailed questions or suggestions or opinions, feel free to share them with us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.